So there's a story that goes like this. There was a couple of young men who were from the north, and it was spring break, and they were visiting a dusty little town in the backcountry of West Texas. It was one of those hard-shell Baptist towns in the heart of the Bible Belt, where the saying goes, ain't no drinking and no dancing in our area. But these two men who came were strangers. So they found a cowboy and they asked where they might get a drink. In this town, said the cowboy, we only use whiskey for snake bite to wash out for first aid. Then he added slyly, if you guys are a little thirsty for some whiskey, there's one poisonous snake in this town and it's in the zoo. So you better get a ticket and go to the zoo, go to that part where the snake is at, get a hold of that Cobra and give it a big hug. The zookeeper will come in no time immediately and give you some whiskey. Now, those guys seem very thirsty. And the reading we just heard, beautiful reading from our gospel, that woman in the well had a mighty thirst. A thirst so big that what she was missing led her through 5 husbands and who knows what else. And yet, in life, she was still thirsty. Why? She had a thirst caused by the absence from God in her life. It was that chance, that encounter with Jesus, that gave her the living waters of friendship. That friendship with Jesus and being anointed by the Spirit of God, it restored her dignity and it changed her life. The Samaritan woman's knowledge of Jesus grew, as we heard in that conversation. The longer she talked with Jesus, the more she was able to learn, the more she grew in knowledge, and the more she was able to change her life. So I'm trying with this homily today just to take a moment, and I want us to ask ourselves this question right now in a moment of silence. St. Matthew, as we knew that this woman's knowledge changed as she was in conversation with God, let's take a moment to reflect, how can you and I increase our time in conversation with Jesus this Lent? All right, continuing. The other readings we heard from give us some spiritual nourishment to reflect on, some things that we could take to feed with us in this world. The first reading we heard, the people grumbled because they thought Moses did not care. So St. Matthew, let's now take a moment and ask ourselves, what causes me to grumble about God's care for me? And finally, in the second reading, Paul reminds us that God's love has been poured into our hearts. So let's take a time and a moment now to ask ourselves, when have I felt that outpouring of God's love in my life? All right, so again, this is being live streamed, so perhaps during this third week of the Lenten season, it could be a good time just to go back and reflect on these readings and to go back and ask these questions, because oftentimes I know when it comes to a homily, we can piously listen, then promptly forget. but let us use these questions that can perhaps guide us and sustain us as we continue our Lenten campaign. I told you earlier at the beginning of this Mass, there's something special today. There have been brothers and sisters that have been journeying, wanting to know about the living waters of Jesus, to come into full communion and learning more, and to become members of the Catholic Church. Today, at this moment, begins the first scrutiny. You might ask, I've heard that. What are the scrutinies? The scrutinies are very special rites celebrated during these middle 3 Sundays of Lent. At this liturgy, where the elect are present, the elect are those in our midst that have been preparing for baptism. And part of their journey to the font is that they have been received among us. That happened when Father Tom celebrated the rite of acceptance. They then journeyed from St. Matthew to the Cathedral Basilica in Savannah, where they have been enrolled in the book of the elect and the rite of election. When it comes to the scrutinies, it can be wonderful to reflect upon the journey that these elect who are about to come forward are making during this Lenten season. At first, as we hear from this ancient rite, it may seem strange to us, but these scrutinies are profoundly rooted in our own human experience. At times in our lives, especially this Lenten season, we need to examine or scrutinize how we are, the areas of our lives that we may feel tempted or seriously wounded by sin in what we do or fail to do. Scrutinies help us to realize that we really need healing and the strength that can come from Jesus and also from one another, our brothers and sisters. So at this time, I now invite the elect to please stand, come forward and face the altar, and have your godparents stand behind you with their right hand over your shoulder.